this month's Wings of Kentucky. This week we're going to talk about a favorite species of mine, the American woodcock. But before we jump into the American woodcock, I'd like to mention a quick correction last week about Niger seed, or sometimes called Niger thistle. A couple of viewers asked about, like, hey, Niger thistle seed, like I don't really want thistle growing in my yard. This seems pretty weird. And I did a little bit more digging, and I was actually incorrect. Even though it's often called Niger thistle, it's not a thistle at all. It's a species of African sunflower or African daisy. It's kind of in that aster family, and it's actually grown mostly in India. It's kind of semi-domesticated. This is kind of a clip from the Wikipedia page on the species, that Niger thistle, if you will, or Niger as it's probably just more appropriately called. It's from that page. And to make things a little bit better, if you're concerned about even this non-thistle spreading, this page here from audubon.org actually talks all about Niger, and it's actually completely sterilized before it's used. Sorry about the phone. I can turn the volume down that, whoever they are. Pardon me. So yeah, it's completely sterilized before it's sold for use. I actually did kind of a semi deep dive into this, and they've tried to grow Niger in the US, and it's kind of been a struggle. Places like, you can actually sort of see a little bit of that text here. In Minnesota, they tried to grow it, and then they took it further south and tried to grow it too. And like, they're sort of sometimes able to cultivate it. However, even when they do manage to cultivate Niger in the US, it's not easy to extract the seed. It's just kind of a huge pain. So this is all to say, Niger is not actually a species of thistle, and when you buy the seed in your local bird store or hardware store or what have you, it's totally sterilized. So that's a little bit of note about that. Apparently, as best I can tell, it seems to be intentionally labeled as thistle to sort of misguide folks who are, know that goldfinches and pine siskins like thistles. Okay, so let's move on to our topic of today, the American woodcock. Now, the American woodcock, the scientific name is Scolopax minor. For any kind of bird overview, we have to at least briefly get into one of these boring slides about kind of basic biology. And taxonomy. And the reason why we're doing that for the woodcock, in addition to kind of it always being helpful, the woodcock is especially confusing because it's what we call a game species. So it's very heavily hunted, but it's not kind of it's not an upland game bird, as they're often called, or a galliform. It is technically a shorebird. So I have the short-billed dowitcher on here, which is another shorebird. Strictly for comparison purposes, we can see, hey, look, short-billed dowitcher is very similar to an American woodcock structurally. Now, big difference is obviously the plumage on the American woodcock is kind of this brown and dark, like almost black and silver, kind of mottled like it would blend in with fallen logs and leaf litter. And that's because the American woodcock, I specifically picked a picture that had the woodcock out in the open, but they are a bird of woodland areas. They do not like to be out in the open like this one. This one's probably feeling pretty nervous here. It is a forest and shrubland nesting bird, and they pretty much spend almost no time near large bodies of water. Now, there are many cool things about the American woodcock, and we're going to discuss a few of them today. But one of my favorite things about woodcocks is that this time of year, here in Kentucky, they're returning from their wintering grounds to begin courtship. Now, there are some woodcock that winter in Kentucky, and maybe those that do are just, finally feeling frisky enough to begin their courtship here. But if you go out to an area that has woodcock and wait right at dusk, you will have the privilege of witnessing the song of the woodcock. The song being a vocalization used to attract mates and defend territories. Not a very musical song. In fact, if you didn't know any better, you might think that the song of the woodcock was some kind of frog. So let's take a look at that woodcock singing and see what it looks like and what it sounds like. Certainly not a very musical song. And the woodcock basically stands there for up to several minutes, kind of doing that vocalization until it's time to engage in the flight portion of the display. So what the woodcock does next is he leaps up into the air, flies up. So here he is on the ground in this image. He flies up, kind of zigzags through the sky, and then what he does, he kind of meanders through the sky, making these sounds. And once he hits the ground, he pretty much stops and resumes his funny little song. Hopefully that's coming through. One of the really bizarre things about the woodcock flight display is you may think, well, gee, he's got that kind of frog-like call, and now he's making this sort of like twittering, liquidy warble. Well, the remarkable thing about that flight display and the sounds you hear is it's actually caused by the bird's wing. Male woodcocks have 3, and females kind of have them too, but they're very pronounced in the male. Very skinny outer primary flight feathers. So you can see these primary flight feathers are somewhat normal, but these 3 out the outer tip of the wing are very small and skinny. And each time the bird flaps a wing, it makes one of those squeaking notes. So it kind of almost sounds like a songbird singing a beautiful song, but really the woodcock, his mouth is completely shut, and all of that sound is produced by the wings. Really cool breeding display. And if you go out right at sunset to some of these spots, you can find a woodcock doing the courtship display. One of my personal favorite things to do is find a woodcock that's doing the song, or sometimes called a peent. Find a painting woodcock. When he flies up into the air to do that flight display, run as quickly as you can to the spot where he was singing, and then stop. And don't move, and he'll come land right near you and continue the painting. And then when he flies, again, you can get closer and closer and closer. If you're wearing camouflage, you don't move, he'll land right next to you and do that display. It's such a cool bird. So where are places you can find woodcock? Well, it's a really common and widespread bird in many parts of Kentucky, but you're generally going to want to look for shrubby areas, early successional areas, places that have shrubs and grasses interspersed. They don't tend to like a lot of canopy cover, but they don't like to have a lot of urban cover either. You don't usually want to go to just like a grassy like hay field, but if you've got like an agricultural field, like a pasture that's got some shrubs and woody stems mixed in, they will absolutely be in there at least some of the time. Now, this bird is very bizarre. So I've got some images here of woodcock. This is the skull of the American woodcock, and you see one hole here and then one hole here. Well, on a normal creature, a normal animal, you might think, well, that's the eye hole and that's the ear hole. Well, in the case of the woodcock, it's totally the opposite. So this one here, actually kind of in front of the eye, is actually the ear hole. This giant one is the eye hole. It's a nocturnal bird, as I think you're probably guessing at this point. So having those really big eyes is very helpful. Now take a look also at the position of the eye in relation to the rest of the skull. It's got this kind of like long rostrum area, and when you look at the bird itself, there's like the eye is really far back here. It's like on the back of the head. And the reason for that is the woodcock, and they've got this long bill, it spends most of its day with its head probed down into the soil. This one looks like it's probably during the daytime, but whether it's foraging in the day or at night, it's got that beak stuck down in the soil. And if you're spending most of your day with your bill shoved in the soil, it's very helpful to have your eyes back on the back of your head, so that way you can still watch for predators while you're probing in soil. Very weird bird. The bill is also prehensile. They can actually open just the tip of the bill while the base of the bill is closed, so they can stick their bill down into the soil and grab earthworms, which is mostly what they're eating. Now, nesting ecology. So this is a woodcock nest here. Not a very accomplished nest builder, the woodcock, but they don't really need to be. They lay almost exclusively a clutch of 4 eggs. occasionally they'll have fewer if, say, a predator takes an egg, like a snake. But they have these kind of like drab beige eggs with these brown speckles. They're relatively well camouflaged, pretty good sized eggs for a bird of its size. And again, they don't really need a nest because most of the time the adult is going to be sitting on those eggs and is quite well camouflaged herself. So the female does all the incubating. After they mate, the male and the female have nothing to do with each other. The male doesn't help care for the young at all. It's all work done by the female. And after a couple of weeks of incubating those eggs, well, they hatch out into some very cute little fluffy babies. So in this case, we've got 1 egg, 2 egg, 3 egg, 4 egg, which is typical for woodcocks. And here are these 4 little fluffy babies, extremely cute little guys. And just like, say, a baby chick, think of a chicken chick or a gosling or a duckling, these birds are what we call precocial. In a precocial bird, as soon as it hatches, they dry off for a few hours, and then their eyes are open, their legs are functional, and they follow around behind mom, and she shows them how to forage. So they're actually feeding themselves. She's not feeding them at all, just like a mother hen doesn't really feed her chicks. Now, similar to a mother hen, what the woodcock may do is she may say, hey, kids, there's food over here. Here's a piece of food, eat it yourself, I found it for you. So she's gonna guide them and lead them to food. And of course, she'll also help them thermoregulate. So they don't have true feathers yet, they just have this down. So when it gets rainy or at nighttime, they'll crawl underneath mom and she'll fluff up and keep them warm over the night. But otherwise, when they're wandering around during the day, they're following right behind mom on their own 2 legs. Now, at the end of the summer and into the fall, woodcock begin to migrate south for the winter. So this is actually an image from iNaturalist. It's really cool. Check it out, iNaturalist.org. That shows all the records people have uploaded of American woodcock. So right now they've got 6,000 records of woodcock. You can upload pictures, you can upload sounds, all kinds of things. But you can see that there's these 2 pronounced humps, kind of one here in like October and November, and one in like March, April, May. So this March, April, May hump is spring migration. This is when we're seeing a lot of woodcock that are moving either from south to north or that are actually actively starting their courtship. In midsummer, you can see they kind of vanish. It's not because they actually vanish, they're just very inconspicuous during the summer. And then the fall time, we see fall migration. A lot of people see woodcock during that period of time, which is also when you can go out and hunt woodcock. Now, speaking of which, woodcock is a very popular game bird, so it's worth noting that. Commonly hunted alongside grouse, and it's a good species for hunting. They hold really tight, so like if you walk up on a woodcock during the daytime, they're not going to just fly away most of the time. They're usually going to hold really tight and hope that you don't see them. Now, of course, a trained dog can smell the woodcock and can point the woodcock while the hunter flushes it and harvests that bird. So it's a very popular game bird. Now, it's worth noting that the woodcock populations have been declining for decades. And this does not seem to be driven by hunting at all. We're going to talk about why that is. But the North American Woodcock Singing Grounds Survey, which has these kind of eastern and central regions, Kentucky falls into the central region, and they monitor these dark colored states for woodcock and have been for a long time. And essentially what we've seen is slow and steady population declines of American woodcock. And with a lot of species that are heavily hunted, it's tempting to think, man, like, is hunting the thing that's causing them to decline? Well, it doesn't seem to be the case in woodcock. There are many threats. This is literally the screen cap that I just took this morning of iNaturalist. These are the most recent records of woodcock on iNaturalist. This seems to be a happy little woodcock here. These 2 are sound recordings of woodcock singing like we showed earlier. And then this one, and these 3, again, these are just the most recent ones, are woodcock that have crashed into buildings, which seems to be a major issue with American woodcock. While they're migrating, they have a very strong propensity to fly into buildings. But the main driver of woodcock population declines, like so many other early successional dependent birds, is the loss of their habitat, usually due to succession, which is a natural process, but with disturbance suppression, succession causes woodcock habitat like this over 20, 30, 40 years to turn into something like this, which is not appropriate for woodcock. Now, to get this again, we would need some kind of timber management or fire or some kind of disturbance, which is one of the main ways we conserve woodcock populations today is with timber management, shrub shearing, shrub management that turns a mature forest back into something early successional for American woodcock. So I think that's all I have for you this week. Go out and find some woodcock, watch that flight display, and think about the habitat that that species needs. And I guess for this bird of the month, cherish the American woodcock, and we'll touch base next month for the next installment of Wings of Kentucky. Get out there, happy birding. We'll talk to you then.
If there are any questions, feel free to pop them in chat or we can hang